Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up, the news and current affairs programme from Compass Media. Every week, myself, Finbar Markey, and my co-host, Padraig O'Mahony, will look at news stories that either haven't got into the mainstream media or maybe haven't had a fair hearing in the mainstream media. Thanks for joining us again this week, Padraig.
Thanks very much, Finbar. Yeah, ready to go.
I think this is our last show before Christmas. There's lots of news to look at, and we probably will be putting out a few short stories over the Christmas period as well. But this is the last full show, so we're going to get a break next week, Padraig.
We are, yeah. Sure, we'll need it.
We bloody well do, I can tell you. I'm looking forward to it. I had my staff Christmas party last Saturday night. Oh, I had a sore head on Sunday morning, and I'm still suffering a little bit as we speak. Let's get stuck in, Padraig. Our first story, there's a lot of news out there, but our first story is looking at Peru. He was the democratically elected president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, elected in 2021 by the popular vote, representing the working class, the poor of Peru. He won a majority, and it looked like Peru was becoming progressive, economically progressive, and that the poverty and the decline that the people of Peru are constantly suffering might have come to an end. Since then, there has been a peaceful, if you want to put it that way, coup d'etat, or he was ousted. Castillo was ousted over the last few weeks through constitutional means. But the people of Peru are not happy at all, and they are protesting, even though their lives are really, really in danger, because the history of South America and people's protest is not good. Again, the ousters, who are the generals and the rich representatives in Peru, are threatening violence and would appear, as per usual, are backed by the United States government. Let's have a look at some of these protests. So that's the people of Peru coming out onto the streets to protest. In the city of, let me just get this right now, in the city of Arequipa, the protesters took over the airport yesterday.
Ahora precisamente están bajando, han invadido, han derrumbado precisamente la valla de seguridad que lleva a los terrenos del aeropuerto, y ya, como podemos ver, han puesto piedras, han tomado prácticamente la pista de aterrizaje del aeropuerto. And
what is quite a shocking development over the last few hours in Peru, the police of the region of Andahuaylas the chief police himself has called on his officers to kill or be killed.
Los combatientes peleamos donde tenemos que pelear y morimos donde tenemos que morir. Bajo un solo lema, ¡Reunir al golpe! ¡Reunir! Porque la silla que nos llega, sembrar la campaña, la paz y la victoria, se llega con ustedes, que jamás tendremos gloria.
We're going to keep a tight eye on what's happening in Peru at the moment, because it looks like it's going to turn violent. It doesn't look like this is going to have a peaceful resolution to it. The police seem to be arming up very heavily. The people are not coming off the streets, even though their lives are in danger, and they know the history of outcomes for popular protests in South and Latin America in general, but they are not stopping. Any comment on this, Padraig?
It just looks like history repeating itself. It looks like it could be one of a number of South American countries going back over the last 50 years. It's shocking to see military presences like that when your understanding is that there was a democratic election, and it looks like the people's word again doesn't count for anything. Yeah,
it's very sad. Hopefully the violence won't be what I actually think it's going to be, but please God, it won't be. In another story, over the last few months, we've been highlighting the dangers of rising interest rates from the European Central Bank and from the US Federal Reserve as well. Again, there was raises last week in interest rates. You wanted to highlight an article, Padraig, in relation to this from the Irish Independent, I think it is.
Yeah, so Finbar, around 100,000 mortgages sold to vulture funds are now being hit by some of the highest mortgage rates in the country. Borrowers must pay interest as high as 7% while being denied the option to lock into lower fixed rates. Consumer advocate Brendan Burgess accused the central bank of throwing these people to the wolves and said people whose loans were sold were now mortgage prisoners. Some borrowers whose loans were sold have been told their mortgage rates are going to go as high as 7.09%, prompting fears of a massive spike in arrears. One borrower said his monthly repayments have gone from around 200 a month to 700 a month. Rates as high as 7% have not been seen for years and are a multiple of European central bank rates. The unfolding mortgage scandal of the central bank's making has all the hallmarks of another crisis. So I think we've flagged it there in the past. These vulture funds and the terms and conditions that they have people locked in on that they never signed up for just because their mortgages were sold. Surely this is an absolute disgrace when you think about Ireland coming from that banking crisis where we almost owned all the main banks in the country. Back to this now.
Did you say Brendan Burgess?
That's right, yeah, that's the name is there, yeah.
This is the guy who, throughout the last financial crisis and the eviction crisis, was all gung-ho in terms of evictions and felt that if people couldn't pay, they should be out in the street. So I'm not sure how concerned this guy really is, to be honest with you, from that point of view. I remember him very well. In fact, I was a part of a primetime program that he was on one time, and he wasn't a very nice guy at all. So that's one of my points. Another point about this story is central bank throws families to the wolves. It's not the central bank, it's the ECB. The central bank just do what the ECB say. And this is, again, maybe an attempt at a pretense that Ireland has some kind of sovereignty when it comes to its own economics, which it clearly doesn't. Finally, my final comment on this is that there's a massive, massive eviction crisis coming. We're talking about other issues. We're talking about heating. We're talking about the price of food, the price of diesel and petrol. This potentially could make a hell of a lot of people homeless. And it's talk about 100,000 people. I wonder, do they mean 100,000 mortgages or 100,000 people? Because 100,000 mortgages is at least 300,000 people. So I'd be pretty concerned about that. And putting figures like that about what people can afford and what, those figures, I'm guessing, are based on the current situation and people's ability to pay currently. There's a recession coming European-wide, and it's here already, essentially, but it really, really has to kick in yet. A lot of people could lose their jobs. And in that context, that 100,000 could go up significantly. And something has to be done about it. There were movements over the last 10 years, very localized movements to try to stop evictions that scared the living bejesus, if you want to say that, out of the government when courts were being shut down by the public, when the Armed Response Unit had to go into courts to try to maintain eviction courts. So the danger to the government and the danger to the overall system of this happening now, especially since so many people have already gone through this once in their lifetime, they may be facing it with the same mortgage again after years of worry, stress, trying to make payments, getting a new deal, and then they're back to square one again. I don't know how much people can take. I was an activist during that time, focused on evictions, and the amount of people who became sick, the amount of people I know who died, people who took their own lives, people who developed mental health problems, families that broke down and broke up. Just phenomenal what the impact of losing your home, or just the threat of losing your home, has on people. So we're going to keep a really close watch on this story, and if there's any movements developing to trying to challenge this, we'll let you guys know about it as well. Our next story is just freaky, is the only word I can use, just abysmally freaky, and it's in relation to assisted suicide, physician provided suicide, and different forms of suicide that governments around the world are now already providing, and potentially other governments may be planning it into the future. This is an article by Vanessa Beeley in The Wall Will Fall. Canada's expanding euthanasia laws making the unthinkable thinkable again. So this is really, Vanessa is focused on the notion of eugenics here, and the idea that there appears to be a global movement that has been successful in some countries that is encouraging the widening and expanding of euthanasia laws to the extent that people with mental health problems, people who are just feeling suicidal, rather than receiving treatment, are receiving suicide assistance and a direct suicide from the state. Let's have a look at this. Death Reborn, Canadian Medical Assistance in Dying, MAID. In 2016, Canada, with Justin Trudeau's administration in office, passed Bill C4, legalizing medical euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. together referred to by Canadian public bodies as medical assistance in dying. By November 2020, more than 19,000 individuals nearing the end of life had been voluntarily euthanized. In March 2021, the law was amended by Bill 7, which permits assisted euthanasia for patients whose death is not reasonably foreseeable. In 2021, it's estimated that more than 10,000 people were assisted in killing themselves in Canada. We'll read it on a little bit more. Now, this is a quotation from psychiatrist journal. I'll get the name, but I can't remember exactly what the name is off the top of my head. Currently, several countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg and Switzerland allow patients who are suicidal to receive death by either lethal injection, euthanasia, or a self-administered prescription for lethal medication, assisted suicide. In 2002, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, all three being collectively known as Benelux, legalized both these practices. Laws in these countries were permitted voluntary death for patients whose physical or psychological suffering was unbearable and could not be effectively treated by means that were acceptable to them. A terminal condition was not a necessary criterion. Now, this is where it gets really worrying. People with mental health problems who are not in a position mentally to decide what's best for them. And quite often we have laws, in fact, that allows psychiatrists to determine that. But here we have a situation where people with psychological suffering that was unbearable and could not be effectively treated by means that were acceptable to them. How many mental health patients at one point in their life did not want to take medication at the beginning? They were afraid of different things, that it would dope them up and things like that. I know two cases of people who've got very positive, progressive lives, who at one point had mental health problems, schizophrenia in one case, and initially did not want or believe in their medication. But they were convinced over time, and they're doing really well now. And they actually have a full life. And yet we have a situation where in a number of EU countries currently, if you're suicidal and you don't want to take medication, there is a means by which you can get the state to help you switch yourself off. I think that's a shocking development. In July 2022, the London Free Press published an article by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 entitled Medical Assistance in Dying Overused in Canada Even Before Expansion. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 gives clear examples of MAID abuse based on evidence provided by doctors, a patient, and family members. Here's two examples. A man was admitted to hospital after suffering a small stroke affecting his balance and swallowing. He was feeling down and isolated due to a COVID-19 outbreak on his ward. The stroke neurologist anticipated he would be able to eat normally and regain most of his balance. Psychiatry diagnosed an adjustment disorder, but noted his prognosis was very good. The patient then requested MAID. Neither of his MAID assessors had expertise in stroke rehabilitation and recovery. Because he was temporarily eating less, the MAID assessors decided he could die right away, instead of waiting the required 90 days for those living with disabilities, despite having no terminal comorbidities. He received medical assistance in dying the following week. The man died alone and depressed, and before he had tried proper therapy or reached maximal recovery. Here's the second case. A 71-year-old widower was admitted to a southwestern Ontario hospital after a fall. His family says that during his admission, he contracted an infectious diarrheal illness. He was humiliated by staff for the smell of his room, his family said. He developed a new shortness of breath that had not comprehensively been assessed. In this context, a hospital team member suggested he would qualify for medical assistance in dying. The team said he had an end-stage chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and it was terminal. The patient was surprised by the diagnosis but trusted the team. Within 48 hours of his first assessment, he received a medically assisted death. Post-mortem testing showed he did not have end-stage COPD. His family doctor, when notified of his death, also stated he did not have end-stage COPD, but the team had failed to contact her when they were assessing the history. What do you make of that, Padraig?
So, everything you've described there is quite shocking, Finbar. So normally what would occur to me straight away is the source, so how solid and reliable is the information that's coming. So I can't say I know much about the source, but would you stand over the origin of it to a degree?
I would stand over the origin of it. Vanessa Beeley herself is a fearless journalist. In terms of the last quotes They come from a psychiatrist, from an organization, representative organization. Before coming on to put this on the show, I did do my own research into this. This is a fact. This is reality. One of my concerns would be the abuse of this. The idea that, to my mind, there's a form of eugenics in here. When I align this with other policies that are developing in EU countries and outside of the EU, such as the Down syndrome-free approach of some countries to birth defects, if you want to call it that, such as Down syndrome, where they're allowing abortion up to full term to ensure that their population is cleansed. And I don't use that word, but it's a word that has been used in the past, cleansed of defects. And when you put it all together, it is a worrying development. And it seems to be a functionalist, scientific approach to life, which looks at life in the terms of health or non-health, but also in terms of contribution to society. And that's where my concern is.
I suppose the only insight I have into this, Finbar, is I would be friendly with a guy who, I think it's a major factor in it now, to be honest. Like, he would describe himself as atheist, and I think that is a big factor when people are talking about end of life situations, because Anton coming from a kind of a background of Christianity or any religion really, like, probably has issues with that, because they will probably believe that they don't get to choose those sort of things. But this guy that I know, the way he looks at it is in terms of like humanitarian end of suffering, stuff like this, where his approach to it is, if he ever got to the stage where he was badly incapacitated, that this is something that he would want. So he would actually advocate for the law to be changed in a very kind of liberal sort of a way. Now, like you say, I would agree. The real scary part is who would be the authority over this type of thing. You're talking about the medical infrastructure of the country and the legal infrastructure of the country. Both places I wouldn't have any faith in ethics, and they haven't got a track record of it. Even when you look at, I think there was a bit of deception in the 8th Amendment campaigning that happened here. There was a lot of people's good nature was probably pushed on for really difficult situations where they were advocating for, in the case of, say, rape or incest or something like this. This was an awful lot of the persuasion that was going on at the time, and a lot of people found it very difficult to argue against that, not in a liberal kind of late contraceptive way. So where you start out and where you end up is a major concern. So if you open the door here, it may sound very humanitarian and caring. Where do you end up? So that's the big concern too. Like, so it's an area I don't know much about, and I wouldn't have looked into much, but those are just the things that strike me.
I think the expression is the thin edge end of the wedge, isn't it? That they'll get something in the door so that they can swell it and exaggerate it and bring it in more fully. An example would be, I just read a post today. I didn't get a chance to really look into it in detail, but apparently there's pushes now to raise the limit for abortion in Ireland beyond 12 weeks. So that's a concern as well. It was voted on not very long ago at all on the basis that it's 12 weeks. Now they're trying to, now that they have it in the door, they're trying to raise that up as well. I'll go back to me point, Padraig, in relation to, there's a big difference between somebody who has been told and is pretty clear that they're going to die soon and it's going to be painful or whatever the case might be, and that they make a decision to end their own life with assistance. There's a big difference in that and people with mental health issues. Who defines what a mental health issue is, for a start? Because there are new mental health definitions and so-called conditions being developed every year by within the DSM, or every 4 or 5 years within the DSM. So it's worrying from that point of view. But also, as I said before, I've known people who've been in the depths of mental health trauma who are doing really, really well now. But I wonder if this option was put to them and if it was encouraged to them, because remember, I think there's a financial aspect to this in terms of certain elements that would promote this. It would save money from the government, having to care for people, having to provide somebody with schizophrenia, for instance, having to provide them with medication throughout their entire life. So I'd be concerned that there's too many interested parties here who would not be encouraging these laws for the best reasons or for the best interest of the patient. So that would worry me quite a bit. And on another story, Padraig, we're looking, or we're rolling closer and closer to a border poll. You have some headlines about that.
Yeah, so Finbar, like I suppose there's been a number of teams that come up week after week for us, and it strikes me that one of them is this element of far right politics in Ireland. And when you think back over the last 100 years, what represented that mostly on this island was probably in an organised way the time of the blue shorts and the green shorts in the 40s and 50s. But then probably more so was the Orange Day. And how that appeared to be quite discriminatory and right wing at times, supremacists, British over Irish type of thing. So what struck me the most about this event was that it was coming from Northern Protestants, and it was their views on a perspective United Ireland, and like we do know that like republicanism itself was established by Protestants in the 1700s. So exactly, yeah. So I mean, I thought it was certainly worth attending this. This would be part of the Ireland Future program. So I logged into this and had a listen to it, and I found it quite good, quite encouraging to listen to people from the Protestant Unionist Loyalist background, really. So I suppose that's the catch-all kind of acronym that was used over the last number of years. So yeah, like there was a number of contributors. There was Ben Collins, who was actually born in Belfast and is a former Conservative Party in the UK member.
He looks like Ian Paisley Jr.
He actually does, yeah. So he's gone on a journey politically, really, like in his own right, where obviously he's coming from a unionist background and he's in the British Conservative Party, to now being an advocate for Irish unity. So I suppose just background on himself, like I think one of the major things that changed his outlook was time living in England. I think this happened to a lot of people when they actually live in England. They discover that their affinity with Ireland is what really stands out for them, and they tend to question things. So yeah, like it's interesting that somebody like that would turn around and be an advocate for change. And one of the other key contributors on the night was a woman called Claire Mitchell, who was a former lecturer in Queen's University Belfast, and she has a book out which is entitled "The Ghost Limb: Alternative Protestants and the Spirit of 1798." So she is obviously looking back at the lineage of the Protestants in that part of the country, and she's looking back at the 1798 connection. And I think she described it as a part of you that is cut off and feeling like you have to hide your Irish parts of yourself. Saying her family have always been Protestants, but have always identified as Irish and always supported unification, which is something that people found that they had to suppress for a long time because of the conflict in the north. Then finally, one of the other main contributors was a guy called Kevin Marr, who was author of a book called A United Ireland: Why Unification is Inevitable and How It Will Come About. He's a former special advisor to the Labour Northern Ireland Secretary Sean Woodward, and like, I mean, the main theme I suppose between them was that they pointed out the main points for movement towards a border poll were based on demographics, the change we've seen over the last number of years. Brexit is a major thing. There's a lot of people from that background actually, and this is something that may conflict with an awful lot of people's views in terms of the EU, but for a lot of Protestants in the north, they see EU citizenship as a big thing that they've kind of pretty much lost to a degree now at this stage, through Brexit and where that's going to bring them. And I think they see that as a way of coming back. And I think Sinn Féin have probably embraced EU membership a lot more in the last few years, because they can probably see that it's something that's quite appealing to a certain demographic of people. I suppose to conclude on it, Finbar, we're still talking about a minority here. So we're kind of saying at this stage that it's around the 50-50 mark between nationalists and unionists in the 6 counties. But within that minority, you have people that are actually looking for change. They're pro-Irish unity. So I
would
think
you
it's
have
something to watch.
In the Republican community, if you want to call it, the national community, if you want to call it that, would you have a minority in there who might be against the notion of a united Ireland as well. We don't know.
There has been, I think there has been always a bit of both, like, you know.
Yeah. I personally, I think right now it'd be them jumping from the frying pan into the fire, because Ireland doesn't have any sovereignty either, you know. So I would like to see united Ireland, but I'd like to see a better Ireland as well. We're going to move on to our next story now. In the Dáil, Carol Nolan, independent TD, asked of the government questions in relation to having a frank and a fair and an adult discussion around the topic of immigration or mass immigration into Ireland. We've covered over the last few weeks in particular how anyone who questions or just wants to know more detail, even at times, about the number of immigrants coming into the country, the nature of where they're coming from, the availability of services and housing for them, any question like that, and you are a far-right extremist all of a sudden. Here's Carol Nolan in the Dáil asking some questions in relation to that.
To begin by wishing you well, and we indeed had no run-ins. I don't believe it was always constructive, so hopefully today will be no different, and I'll try to remain constructive. Taoiseach, 100 years after the birth of the Irish Free State, I believe this chamber, which sits at the heart of our democracy, should be a forum in which members are free to discuss issues which are of grave concern to the people that we are here to represent. I would hope that we could do so in a sensitive but robust manner, and that our Parliament can avoid becoming a place where there are unspoken rules that discourage certain questions being asked, and where groupthink or complicity in silence becomes the order of the day. For an increasing number of people, one of the issues that is demanding of more serious and frank levels of open debate is that of immigration. The impact that this is having on housing, healthcare and education, and indeed the apparent dysfunctionality that surrounds our entire asylum application process. As policy issues, these must be treated like every other area, where a clear assessment of successes and failures can be discussed honestly. They cannot and must not be no-go areas in terms of our political discourse. Unfortunately, that is what appears to be happening. Every time my independent colleague in the Seanad, Senator Sharon Keoghan, tries to speak on these issues, she is shouted down. If I or my rural independent group colleagues try to raise concerns, we are accused, absurdly and ridiculously, of trying to tear apart the fabric of social cohesion. And yet, what we are saying is inevitably proven to be correct. Taoiseach, I, like many others, am deeply concerned about the pressure and the anger that is building up in communities relating to the way in which the state has chosen to house those seeking international protection. I am more alarmed that despite our obvious capacity deficits and the scale of emergency, hundreds of applicants were still in tented accommodation until just a few days ago, in freezing temperatures. We are at the tipping point of a real and profound social catastrophe. The rate of people entering the country from states and areas designated as safe by the EU is increasing by hundreds of percent in some cases. Our hotels are at maximum capacity here. Our emergency accommodation is beyond breaking point. Our own homeless numbers are breaking records, yet there seems to be no plan to press the pause button. Taoiseach, the key point here is that we need a sustainable solidarity. What we have at present is not sustainable. We need a system that is not burdened to the point of collapse, yet that is what we have. We have to adopt a new approach. We have to press pause. It is a painful but obvious truth that we must recognise. Do you agree? Thanks, Garda.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising the issue, and I assure the Deputy that no issue should be excluded from this House in terms of debating and discussion. It's fundamental to our national Parliament that we would have open debate, free debate, and that the voice of the contrarian is always heard. I don't apply that to you in this context, but the voice of the contrarian should always be heard. Groupthink is always dangerous, and we shouldn't always follow the herd on any issue, be it economy, be it education, be it anything. So that's the first point I would make. Second point I would make is that Ireland, historically, and if we go back 100 years, and if we go back to 1916, beyond 100 years, one interesting key ingredient of our revolution was it was internationalist. It was not a narrow nationalism. It was internationalist from day one. The idea of Ireland taking its place among the nations of the world. Our membership of the League of Nations, of the United Nations, has been about an adherence to and loyalty to a multilateral rules-based order. And what stems from that then is we having obligations as members of the United Nations, as members of the European Union laterally. We're now members of it, will be shortly celebrating 50 years of membership of the European Union. And that means when the international rules-based order is attacked, we can't stand alone as an island that's not impacted. The war in Ukraine is a war on the international rules-based order, being no doubt about it. Putin does not want the thriving democracy on his doorstep. That is fundamentally what's at stake. Issues to do with geopolitical security, he has raised those. They can be dealt with and can be agreed, and members of the European Union, leaders of the European Union have said to President Putin, you know, we're open for discussions to resolve issues to do with the security architecture of Europe. But he is bombing, as we speak, innocent women and children and families. He's bombing energy infrastructure. He is deliberately, as part of a hybrid form of warfare, creating a migration crisis, creating an energy crisis, and creating a food crisis. Now, I don't think morally we should stand aside. 66,000 people have come into this country from Ukraine. It is a huge challenge, that I acknowledge. The vast majority of the Irish people have opened up and said, we will do what we can. This is a wartime situation. That's what we are facing. We can't allow Putin win by sowing the seeds of division amongst us because of the pressures and challenges that inevitably arise because of the migration flows. More globally, in terms of international protection, climate change, more conflict in places like Ethiopia, in Africa, Middle East, are all leading to increased migration, not just in Ireland, but across the world. That is a reality we're going to continue to have to deal with into the future. And I think we have to stand up for our responsibilities and do the best we can.
Oh my goodness, you know something, I almost feel like going into a rage listening to that response. First of all, Carol Nolan said that from countries that the EU deems safe, didn't mention Ukraine, didn't mention refugees coming from Ukraine. In terms of what he says about the EU has consistently stoked this war in Ukraine and continued to do so, putting arms into the situation, facilitating the creation. Look at Angela Merkel this week gave an interview on a German station in which she said Minsk Agreements 1 and 2 were never serious on the part of EU negotiators such as Merkel, such as France, and that it was just a holding position until they could build up the military to go to war in the East. And so Merkel admitted that, and this man has the cheek to stand there and ignore the points and say that the vast majority of the Irish people have opened up themselves up to Ukrainian refugees, which is not true. The Irish government are in a state of exasperation at the fact that they cannot get people to open up their homes to Ukrainian refugees, and that most people who did make offers didn't fulfill or go through on those offers to the end stage. So I'm just so frustrated. I'm surprised that Carol Nolan could sit there without at least nodding her head at the I have to be blunt about it, at the crap that just came out from Micheál Martin in response to her question. What's your opinion on that, Patrick?
Textbook sort of answer from Micheál Martin. You probably could have expected most of it, but he even surpasses himself there towards the end. Look, he started out by describing how important it is to have discourse in the parliament, in a democracy. He does that, and at the same time, he basically tells lies, because the democratic will of the people hasn't been tested on many issues for a very long time. And like, I'm personally not against migration. I'm not against people coming into the country, immigration. Not against it. The circumstances should be honest, transparent. People should be allowed to talk about. We should have provision. All these things are problems. Like, I mean, she come across like she's raising issues in a very honest way. She's asking questions. She wants to have a public debate on it. But it seems like there's already an agenda set, and everything would be done to justify that. And certainly there's an awful lot of mistruths there, like towards the end of what he's saying.
The whole thing, even this premise of that the Irish Revolution, as he called it, the Irish uprising, 1916 and into the early 1920s, that was an international affair. The only country that recognized the declared Irish Republic was Russia. The only country to not even the United States. And he had the cheek to say it was an international effort. Oh my goodness, what a liar. What an absolute deceiver. I'm going to move on from this story because I'm getting more frustrated as we continue on. There have been ongoing protests in the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, the Benelux countries, as we said earlier, in relation to the attempts, the introduction of laws and regulations, climate mitigation or climate change mitigations, laws and regulations. The protests are not being shown at all on mainstream media, and even we're not seeing very much of it with regards to other medias. But there was protests still happening in Holland, in particular in the Netherlands, and the police have now upped the ante. They're overturning protesting tractors, farmers, with the farmers still in the tractors using JCBs and bulldozers, and they're arresting farmers as well who are just standing on the sidelines. Have a look at this.
De politie is een trekker aan het omkiepen. Het is een politietrekker. De man gaat voor de Volvo staan. En de Romeo's komen eraan. Dit zijn agenten in burger. En die trekken de boer mee naar binnen. Undercover. Hij wordt flink aangepakt.
These protests are ongoing, Padraig, and yet you think there was nothing happening at all. What's your opinion on that?
It's very heavy-handed, and this is based on climate change initiatives, like something that's supposed to come across as caring for the world and the future of humanity. But again, like we could make this point nearly with everything. There's no democratic test going on, so you're going to make huge social and economic change to the way people live, and you're just going to do it and enforce it and strong arm it. It's shocking.
I think the protests are only beginning. I think next year, with the economic pressures that are mounting, just with everything, it's going to come to a crux, and possibly the farmers, the striking workers across Europe are all going to come together and give the hierarchy, the upper echelons of the hierarchy within the EU, a good kick in the butt, which I think is what they need. We covered a story last week from New Zealand in which parents of a baby that required surgery were objecting to the idea that the child would have a blood transfusion due to the surgery with blood that contained COVID vaccines. They had campaigned for their child not to be provided with such blood. They had organised donors of blood, including the mother who was not vaccinated, and yet the state pressed ahead with seizing the child this week off the parents for them to give them that surgery with the blood that had COVID vaccines in it. It seems to me like they don't want to start a trend of people asking for blood that doesn't have COVID vaccines in it. This video footage of the moment that the parents had their child taken off them by the police in New Zealand is pretty traumatizing. Have a look at this.
Have his pre-op checks before a surgery that's scheduled and can't be changed. Well, it can be changed.
I think so baby needs as much rest as possible so that he can...
Excuse me, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, don't do that, boys. Hey, don't do it.
Please don't do it.
Hey.
Now we're talking about the surgery.
You guys are criminals!
What do you think about that, Padraig?
It is shocking to see. It is very sad to see. There's a couple of things strike you, like made the point last week that if it was a religious belief that this probably wouldn't be forced, because generally constitutions do protect people for religious liberty, like, and science is kind of pseudo religious at times, people's belief in it, like whether they actually know anything about it or not. Like, I have to say, I mean, the issue itself, I don't know if there is any real risk in COVID donated blood. Like, you know, I mean, even if that is an accurate way to describe it, like the donation of blood by somebody who has had a COVID injection, I don't know if there's any risk in that. But the thing that's upsetting about it is that the parents don't consent to it, and they can provide alternative. And it seems like the state has stepped in where it doesn't belong.
The decision was taken, as far as I can see, to protect a political narrative, not to provide the parents and the child with what they believe is in their best interest, but to defend a political narrative and to prevent a situation where more and more people into the future are asking for unvaccinated blood, specifically talking about the COVID vaccine here. There are some people who feel that, or argue that when you receive vaccinated blood, that it's genetically modified and it creates modifications within one's own body. I'm not sure if that's true or not. So I'm not making any claim to that. What I'm saying is that's a worry that these parents have. And it should be taken on board. The fact that the state can step in and do something like this. The parents who are clearly really good, caring parents, they're in no way offensive to their child. They're not denying their child a medical procedure. In fact, if anything, they want to enhance the quality of that medical procedure by being able to choose blood that they feel may be tainted. So it's a very worrying development. I hope we don't see any more of it, but I think we will see more of it. That video would scare the life out of any parent who maybe was thinking of opting for blood that doesn't have COVID, or asking for blood that doesn't have COVID vaccine in it. So it's pretty scary. We'll move on from there. The Irish Taoiseach, or sorry, Taoiseach, who's about to become Taoiseach again, is named, and with Taoiseach we mean Irish Prime Minister. His name is Leo Varadkar, and he's gay. The world and its mother knows he's gay because he made sure everybody knew about it. He's also in a long-term relationship with somebody, and he has used that relationship quite often in his image-making campaigns and in his political campaigning, with images and videos and newspaper reports where he and his partner and their home have been featured in the past. Over the last week, a video has emerged from a nightclub scene in which Leo Varadkar, the future Taoiseach and the current Tánaiste, is seen kissing a young man in a snogging type of way, to be blunt about it, not a kiss in the cheek kind of a thing, in a nightclub. And the video has gone viral. Since then, the Irish media and the political establishment have gone insane on this issue, saying that his privacy was invaded and that nobody has a right to share this kind of a video, etc. And you might think there's a little bit of logic in some of that argument. But when you see the fact that he has actually used his relationship and tried to put himself over as a cleaner and squeaky clean person that's in a monogamous relationship, that's the image that I perceived and that other people perceived looking at this media campaign that he's had in the past using his relationship. Well, now the same story is being used to try to introduce further censorship and shutdown of the coverage of politicians outside of the political arena themselves and their behaviour outside of the political arena itself. Here's a headline from the current Irish Taoiseach. New era of strict social media rules is now imminent, says Micheál Martin in wake of Leo Varadkar video. So new strict social media rules. Isn't this manna from heaven for the politicians? I wonder if these social media rules were there when Golfgate was happening, which was when politicians were partying during the COVID lockdowns that they actually initiated in Ireland. I wonder if those videos or those photographs would have been caught in the net of this new era of strict social media. If the parties in number 10 during the COVID lockdown, would they have been restricted, those images from being shared in this new era of social media? There is a Labour Party in Ireland. You wouldn't think there was a Labour Party in Ireland. It's minuscule because they've become so to my mind, juxtaposed to the interests of the workers in this country. And there's an even less known person leading it, a woman called Ivana Bacek, who's from an academic background, and I suspect hasn't really done a hard day's labour in her life. Here's what she wants to do and what she feels about this video circulating on the Taoiseach.
On a serious note, I was horrified at the leaking of the video about the Taoiseach. I think it was utterly unacceptable. It was a gross invasion of his private life, and it's something that shouldn't happen. And I think Ian's right about anonymity. And I think that actually is a crucial point, because you can't sue for libel or defamation if you don't know who you're suing. So people can hide behind anonymity on social media, and that's what has made it pernicious. Now, I'm somebody who uses Twitter. There can be a huge democracy to social media, and we've seen it used for very positive purposes as well. But undoubtedly, the lack of requirement for verification has been a problem in terms of regulation of social media and preventing harms. Brendan Howland, my Labour colleague, actually brought forward Coco's Law, one of the reforms we've seen. And we do need law. Here I disagree with Ian. We do need laws to regulate social media. The Coco's Law initiative was important because it has created new criminal offences around sharing of images online and so on.
It's quite specific, though. It's quite narrow, isn't it?
And that's why we also need the Online Safety Act that Alex is talking about, that the President just signed into law recently, because that brings us the civil side, the new Online Safety Commissioner, the power to bring in.
Okay, so that's Ivana Bacek, the Labour leader. Just on a few things that she said there. First of all, she was horrified. How horrified was she really? Picture of somebody kissing somebody in a nightclub. Was it really that horrifying, Ivana? Number one. Number two, what are you talking about defamation laws? Nobody claimed that. Nobody said that Varadkar did something that he didn't do. So what has defamation laws got to do with anything here? So that's just her trying to fill in the air with sound, as far as I can make out. Finally, she starts talking about Twitter and the verification process on Twitter. I think she just read something over the last week that Elon Musk was introducing a verification process, and she just threw that into the mix to sound like she knows what she's talking about. But nothing that she has actually said really relates to the video that was shared by Varadkar. And the fact of the matter is, as far as I'm concerned, Varadkar has used images like these constantly in the media to promote the notion that he's in a lovely, loving, monogamous relationship. Everything's happy. But at the same time, if an image or a video emerges which counters this, then there's a problem. It should be taken down. Either politicians do have their personal lives out there for promotion, or they don't. One or the other. But if you're in politics, you behave in a certain fashion. A nightclub is a public place. Are you saying that you can't take photographs in nightclubs now? One final point on this. I was involved in the campaign for Coco's Law, and I know Coco's mother very, very, very well. And the laws that her citation of Coco's Law is an insult to the people who are victims and who are driven to suicide, which is what Coco's Law is about. It's about stopping people being driven to suicide because their private images were shared online, as in actual sexual images, or on the other hand, that they were hounded online and threatened using the internet and bullied into killing themselves. That's what Coco's Law was about. It wasn't about protecting politicians who were caught kissing and snogging somebody who is not their full-time partner in a nightclub. That's not what Coco's Law was about. What's your take on this one, Portal?
Merlo, I remember an image of Leo Varadkar at a music festival during level 5 lockdown in Ireland. So this was the most stringent lockdown that you could have. You were in 2 kilometers of your own home, right? So this is a time when people's movements were restricted, which is something that one time a few years back Micheál Martin described as fascism, restricting people's movements, right? So there's an image that I can remember of the very Leo Varadkar at a concert in England while we were all being locked down like that. I can remember another image of a social occasion that he was having, I think, next to in the, I'm not sure, was it the park, was it Phoenix Park, or was near Irish Neutron, or
Yes.
somewhere that I'm not sure exactly where it was. But there's 2 images, right? And they compromised his integrity, right? Of being in it with us, we're all in this together, that type of thing. Never mind this one in the nightclub. Let's look at it on a broad basis, So does this now exonerate them from being in the public eye when they're supposed to be leading by example on issues where they're enforcing laws upon us, but they're not living by them themselves. So where does this lead you to? It's a total state censorship is what they want. They want it all their own way as such, you know.
And that's what I'm really horrified about Ivana Bacek. I'm not horrified about the fact that he was caught out. Whether he's in an open relationship or not, I don't know. I don't really care, to be honest with you. I actually found the video itself, when I saw it, it kind of turned me a little bit. Not because I'm anti-gay. You know, I'm not going to go around saying what I am or aren't, or what my sexual orientation is. But I'm certainly not anti-gay. But I didn't particularly want to see that video myself. But it's just telling that they're using this now to try to push through laws to protect themselves, to ensure that if they're caught out in the public doing something that goes against their own what would you call it, espoused scruples, if you want to call it like that, that they can have those images taken down.
But there is something a bit unsafe, Finbar, about legislation possibly coming from the actions of a legislator, you know. It's a bit of a dodgy ground, really.
It is. We have another Irish female elected politician, Neasa Hourigan, who was at a Dáil committee on health this week, and she was talking to one of the big finance guys, and he was trying to say that you can't put an estimate price on the building of the children's hospital or any hospital because it's an ongoing thing. But she's an architect herself in her professional life, and she wasn't taking any of his BS. You want to have a look at this?
Will be at this stage, but obviously we have to go through the tendering process, and we'll have a better idea when we see what the tender prices say.
Okay, but I mean,
we can't anticipate what the market will ultimately price it.
Well, you can forecast how much a hospital is going to cost. You absolutely can.
No, we can't.
No, you absolutely can.
No, we can't, Deputy.
No, you absolutely can. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. This is my area of expertise not so long ago. You absolutely can put a price on what a hospital is going to cost, notwithstanding the failure of this state to do so in the past.
Very happy to talk about the successes and the failures of the state.
You can forecast a range. That's not correct to say, Mr. Watt. You can forecast a cost.
We can come up with a range, Deputy, absolutely a range now of what we think today.
So we could have a range on electives. So what other sectors?
But I don't know what the cost of cement and steel and everything else is going to be in 2 or 3 years' time.
You can forecast construction inflation.
If you can.
You absolutely can. There
probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Thousands of people in this world who are expert in forecasting.
They're not experts. I'm afraid you can. Anyway,
okay, we don't believe in experts anymore.
Nobody's an expert on the future, right?
Other than electives, what other costs are not known?
So I think she put him in his place and called him out on his waffle. It's rare to see something like that in the Irish Parliament. What do you think of it, Padraig?
I think we called it out in week 1, Finbar. I think back 2007 they had said it was 500 million, if I can remember correctly, right? They're past 2 billion there at one stage, so they're past that now. If they had built the thing when they were supposed to build it, it wouldn't cost as much as it's costing now. If they had any interest in the welfare of people in the state that they represent, then they wouldn't be funding builders and speculators and developers. Like it's those people that are getting rich. Like it's those people that benefit from delays and like I mean it just drives you absolutely mad, because like there is nothing as sensitive as health, you know, and we're talking about children's hospital as well, like, you know, so it's shocking altogether.
But when you see one of our top civil servants, Robert Watt, being schooled by an architect on the basics, and he just looked like he knew nothing. He looked like, what do? They just sit there twiddling their pencil all day, that they don't know that these professionals exist that can put a price on things. Again, most of these top civil servants, in my opinion, are put there to protect the political classes more and protect an overall political clique overall. I don't think they have that much value. In fact, if anything, I think they take away from the value of the state in the way they behave. And if you're living in Donegal and you need a member of the Garda Síochána, which is the Irish police, you better need them in and around the actual police station or Garda station themselves, because the police in Donegal or the Garda don't have any vehicles or any cars. Thomas Pringle, who is one of the TDs independent representing Donegal, was in the Dáil this week, and he was highlighting this problem of no Garda cars.
We have one guard on duty in Kilbeggs and one guard on duty in Clanty's, and no squad car between the two of them. So unless crime is happening in the barracks, it won't be detected.
No police in Donegal.
Like, come on, like what one. No cars, Finbar, and like I mean, it's shocking again. Like, where is our money being spent? Like, I know they take a hell of a lot of tax from us, but if you can't put it into the basic infrastructure for people to live, like that, they shouldn't be in power. You know, they really shouldn't at this stage. It's shocking altogether.
And it just shows at a time where we're dramatically increasing our population with immigrants, as Carol Nolan was saying earlier, and making the point that we have no services. We have nothing to give anybody. And we have the people of Donegal who are open to crime. Basically, if any criminal hears of that, they'll hop in a car and they'll go to Donegal because they know they can do anything in Donegal and they're not going to get caught. That's just the situation. And I'm sure Donegal is not the only area, the only county in Ireland that's suffering that problem. Finally tonight, folks, the Washington Post, in my opinion, has been a tool, in fact, a creation of the US Secret Services, and has been a mouthpiece for the deep state and US Secret Services for at least 40 years. It has lost 500,000 subscribers in the last year alone. And so there are going to be staff cutbacks. And there was an employee town hall meeting in the Washington Post over the last few days where staff were told there were going to be cutbacks and job losses. They weren't told how many job losses, but they were just told that there was going to be job losses, and they were not pleased at all. Now, I'm not celebrating in any way job losses, especially coming up to Christmas. But I'll tell you one thing, I am celebrating the fact that the Washington Post is on the decline, and I'd like to see that decline rapidly accelerate, and for social media and for people who are trying to bring balanced news, for them to accelerate in terms of their audience, whilst the Washington Post and the likes of the Washington Post lose their audience. Here's a quick video of that town hall meeting where staff were told that there was going to be job losses.
We're not going to turn the town hall into a grievance session for the I'm sorry.
Ask the question.
Brad, you talked about positions getting eliminated. What are you going to do to protect people's jobs? Are they going to be treated like the magazine staffers were?
We'll have more information as we move forward. Thank you very much.
And how will your positions be decided?
You seem to be disrespecting this.
Maybe into the future, some of those people will leave the Washington Post, they'll get a conscience, and they'll start doing real reportage and real media and real journalism. Again, as I said, Patrick, I'm not celebrating anyone losing their job. What do you think of that story?
Yeah, you would like to think that people would be respected, like the readers would be expected. Well, I suppose people that are employed there would expect to be respected, and it looks like that organisation doesn't seem to do any of that. Like there's no transparency and truth in what they report an awful lot of the time, and there's certainly no transparency and honesty then when it comes to the employment rights of people. So, like you're working for a compromised organisation, you can expect to be mistreated.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that is the last story that we're doing on the last show of 2022. As I say, we'll probably produce a few short clips and cuts over the Christmas holidays, but we won't be producing another full show until 2023. Imagine that. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year.